thank you for coming on to speak to me. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you.
I'll get straight into my questions, and we'll kick off with what sparked your interest in engineering?
Well, I was always quite interested as a young girl, but as a certain age, when I was at school many, many moons ago, obviously girls didn't do engineering subjects, and I was pushed into English, even though I was excellent at maths and physics and chemistry. So I was always interested in engineer, but only came into it in later life due to having been pushed down the wrong path as a child. In the 70s and 80s, it was very rare to have women in engineering. So it was a bit of a struggle trying to get into it.
And so, I mean, from that, obviously, it was difficult to pursue it in the mainstream education. Later on, how did you go about developing that interest when you did eventually sort of move into it?
It was actually, I worked abroad in France for 13 years, and I actually got into it in France because I was a technical translator, interpreter, and that's when they realised that I had a good engineering brain, and I became a radiographer on the turbine blades for Rolls-Royce. And then I came back to England, I think 2001, and decided that I would go back to university on day release. So that's how I got back into it.
Excellent. And I mean, in your current role, what does your day to day look like?
My day-to-day job can be anything and everything to do with welding. So as a welding engineer, I'm a metallurgist by trade. I read metallurgy at university. So that's the study of materials and their properties. Obviously, being an engineering company owner, I employ welding inspectors who go out and test all the welds. We're working on Hinkley Point, so we work in nuclear, gas, offshore, structural steel. But my main job is as a consultant. So I'm a bit of a problem solver. So if anything fails, I have to go in and investigate why the welders failed. I help people develop welding procedures. I work with the structural engineers to decide how we're going to weld something, what material we're going to use. I'm a bit of a material scientist, but I work on structures, for example, the Shard football stadium, just working on Everton's new stadium, Hinkley Point, Sellafield, and obviously I'm bilingual French, so I work a lot for EDF on the nuclear side in France as well. So 2 days are never the same, which is great. I get a phone call, I've got a bag, and I just go wherever the problem are because I'm a problem solver.
Fantastic.
So yeah, I have the best job in the world.
Fantastic. What are the biggest misconceptions that people have about your job? What do you come across?
The main issue is that nobody actually knows what a welding engineer does. And if I tell anyone in the general public that I'm a metallurgist / welding engineer, nobody knows about this job. So people think that I'm a welder and they don't understand what engineering actually involves. And as I say, even in our industry, people struggle to understand what a European International Welding Engineer is. We do 8 years at university, so it is quite a long, complicated route, but people just think that I'm like Flashdance, a welder. They don't understand my job. Even my children don't understand what I do, and they're in their 30s.
It's a very important job because these buildings are going up and they've got to make sure the welds are right on the steel, haven't they? So
exactly.
So my next question I've got is, it's quite well written. I didn't write it because I wouldn't have been able to phrase it like this. But what is it like to be a woman in engineering? Do you feel that your gender gives you a different perspective and experience from that of your male counterparts?
Definitely. I think I'm at an advantage, especially in my sector in engineering, in welding engineering, because there are very, very few women in my sector. So I have an advantage that I stick out like a sore thumb. So it's been really good because everyone remembers me. And also working with men, I think especially because I've worked away offshore and worked away on site, I get treated, shall I say, I get a better ride than the men because you tend to get looked after as a woman on site. But also they have a lot more confidence in me, and they will trust me more because I'm a woman and I've maybe a bit of a softer approach, and these guys work away from home for months on end. I look at a problem differently to a man because I think I'm very practical and I just want to get it done and sort the problem out. And the welders actually have a lot of respect for me, because I respect them and I treat them how I want to get treated. And I do get a lot of respect for being a woman doing my job because it is really tough. And sometimes we can be away for weeks on end, out on the wind turbines in the middle of the sea. It's a tough job, but they respect me probably more than my counterparts. So yeah, I would say I've been really fortunate being a woman in my industry, because from being a company owner, it's been really good because everybody remembers me being the woman welding engineer in the industry.
Yeah. Cool. So the next question I've got is, obviously, what do you think that the industry could do to better promote the STEM career path to the next generation of women in engineering?
I think the main thing that I would like to see done is people going into schools and actually explaining the different possibilities there are in engineering industries, because not many people know about all the career paths. For example, career paths in welding and fabrication. We're crying out for welders, fabricators, whether they be male or female. The average age of a welder in this country is 57.
Well, we know all about that, Jayne.
Yeah, and to be honest, these jobs need to be promoted to women and to girls and boys in schools, because they don't realise that there are such things as structural engineers, design engineers, welding engineers, QSs, just to promote jobs in engineering. But especially to girls, I mean, I have had the time of my life and the best career ever in this industry, and it would be good if we could promote it. Have I lost you again? Sorry.
You're catching up. There you go. Yeah, I got the audio. You froze for a second, but it's all right. The magic of editing. Don't worry.
But if I could honestly answer that question as well, I think that the actual industry needs to keep up with us, because I can give loads of examples of fabrication shops that I have to spend a lot of time in that don't even have women's toilets. And, you know, in this day and age, it's unbelievable.
This is a point that Megan, who I spoke to this morning, touched on, that she still finds that if she has to go into certain buildings on the sites that she works on, there's no women's toilets and things like that.
Yeah.
It's something that the industry definitely needs to catch up on, is facilities for everybody
definitely
on the sites.
Yeah.
I mean, and this question sort of is in line with that. It's like, do you feel that over the years, and in your earlier career, perhaps before you got to owning your own company, in the hiring processes, companies and recruiters may have treated you any differently based on your gender?
Definitely. Definitely going back to the 80s and 90s, it was really tough because I was a woman, and a lot of people didn't take me seriously. And I always said I always started at a disadvantage and always had to prove myself. They wouldn't just take my qualifications. I had to actually prove what I knew. And I mean, in the early days, I got sent on jobs and the men refused to have me in the workshop because they wouldn't have a woman in there, or they didn't have women's showers or facilities. And yeah, not so much now, obviously, totally different now. But in my early days, for example, I remember trying to get on a boat to go offshore, and the guy wouldn't take me because he wouldn't have a woman on his boat, and having to share digs with welders, and they're saying, if you want to come and do it in a man's job, you've got to live with the men and be like the men. So I just had to do it. Yeah.
That's fair enough. Well, I'm coming up to my last question, but before I get to it, you did mention when we first started that you were being recognised for 10 years since you won an award for your contributions towards women in engineering. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, 10 years ago, I got nominated for it's the Women in Business National Awards and Women of Achievement. And my category was, I won the category of women in a man's world. And then there was lots of different categories for women in business and women in engineering. And then I won the overall Woman of Achievement award for my achievements as a woman in engineering. And I actually got, it was Moira Stewart who presented me with the award. And from then on, I did a lot of promotions in schools and colleges, trying to get girls interested in engineering, which I'm always trying to do. So yeah, that was a big achievement to win that. I think there was something like 15,000 candidates, and I won the overall award for my achievements.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's excellent. So yeah, the final question, and it touch on going into schools and speaking to younger people. What is the one piece of advice you would give any young woman or young girl, even an even younger age, that would be interested in engineering to pursue it? What advice would you give them?
Oh, I would say definitely pursue it, because I would say I've had the best time of my life and I love my job, and I've been really fortunate because we've got really good people in engineering. But on the other hand, it is really tough. So you've got to be a certain person to survive it. And every time I've been to college or university, I've always had to be better than the boys to prove myself. So if you really do want to do it, you can be very successful, but you need to be a certain type to be able to do it. It is a man's world and it is tough. Not so much nowadays as from my day when I started out. But yeah, definitely. And maths, physics and chemistry, absolutely priceless. And even if you just start out in general engineering, then decide what sort of engineer you want to be. But there are so many opportunities in engineering for women and for everyone. But yeah, I would say, definitely don't listen to advice and definitely go into it. It's the best industry ever.
Excellent. Really well put. Well, I'll close it off there, Jayne. Thank you for coming
Thank
on and
you.
speaking to me today.
You're welcome.
It's been brilliant.